Good evening. Welcome tonight to Hardin Hall and to East Campus here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and to this, our fourth in the new series of the Heuermann Lectures here at the Institute of Ag and Natural Resources here at UNL. We're very pleased you're here tonight. We think we have a great program in store for you, and we appreciate you very much being here on kind of the only day of winter that we've had so far. So good to see you all here. My name is Ronnie Green. I have the pleasure and privilege of serving as the Vice Chancellor of INR here at the university. And please, on behalf of all my colleagues, accept our welcome. I'd first like to tell you just a little bit about this new lecture series. This is the fourth one of these that we started this academic year. It's a new event for us here on campus, where we're focusing on bringing leaders to our campus to talk to us about the large issues, challenges that are ahead of us in food security and natural resource sustainability, in energy for the world, and particularly how we sustain our rural landscapes as well. This has been enabled for us this year due to the generosity of lifetime agriculturalists here in Nebraska, Keith and Norma Heuermann. The Heuermanns are from Phillips, Nebraska. They've been very generous to the university over a long number of years. They're here tonight with us on the front row. Keith and Norma, thank you so much for your gift, and please extend our appreciation. Like all of our lectures, this one tonight is being live streamed across the country and the world so that others can join here with us who aren't able to be here physically. It's being seen on campus cable channel 4 and Lincoln channel 21, which reaches the surrounding Lancaster County area as well. We are video web streaming these lectures on the web, and they're also archived on the web so that folks can go back and see them at a later time at heuermannlectures.unl.edu. Tonight, we are particularly pleased to welcome to our campus Mr. Stewart Brand. His topic, as you will have seen in our publicity, is Green Ag Biotech, a very fitting topic for this lecture series, and I know that we have a lot of provocative thinking coming to us from him based on earlier conversations with him. Just a few things about a little bit of background about Mr. Brand to help you frame and put in context his presentation. He's done a lot of fascinating things in his life. Here's just a few of those. To give you some flavor, he founded, edited, and published the original Whole Earth Catalog from 1968 to 1972. In 1972, he received the National Book Award for his book, The Whole Earth Catalog, published by Random House, that in all of its editions has sold over 2.5 million copies. He's a biology graduate from Stanford University in 1960. He served 2 years of active duty as a U.S. Army officer, taught basic infantry training, and worked as a photojournalist in the Pentagon. He is the author or editor of a number of publications, including, interestingly, 2 Cybernetic Frontiers, the first book to use the term personal computer in print, and the first to report on computer hackers, which we regularly live with on a daily basis now. He edited and published Whole Earth Epilogue and founded, edited, and published Coevolution Quarterly between 1974 and 1985, which continued to 2003 as the Whole Earth magazine. In 2009, his book Whole Earth Discipline, an Eco-Pragmatist Manifesto, was published. Mr. Brand is co-founder and president of the Long Now Foundation, which works to make long-term thinking more common as a counterpoint to today's accelerating and rapidly changing culture. He also co-founded and works for Global Business Network, which helps clients address critical challenges and gain what they need to shape the future. He's the subject himself of 2 books, From Counterculture to Cyberculture, Stewart Brand, The Whole Earth Network and the Rise of Digital Utopianism, and Counterculture Green, The Whole Earth Catalog and American Environmentalism. One of the things that we found particularly fascinating about Mr. Brand is that in his book, The Whole Earth Discipline, he also describes himself as a man with opinions that, and I quote, are strongly stated and loosely held. And I think we'll probably see some of that tonight, meaning that he is, in fact, open to facts and persuasive argument. In watching him at dinner tonight, I think that statement is certainly true. You'll hear tonight about how he supports technology for environmentalism. That's one of the reasons that we were so attracted to bringing him here tonight to our campus. Tonight, he will talk to us about the use of biotechnology in agriculture and how that can help feed the world while yet improving the environment. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Stewart Brand.
I gave my pledge as an American to save and faithfully to defend from waste the natural resources of my country, its air, soil, and minerals, its forests, waters, and wildlife when I was 10 years old, just a little ways east of here in Rockford, Illinois, northern Illinois. Flying into the snowstorm last night felt like coming home. And it was wonderful to see because coming over the Sierras, there's no snow in the Sierra Nevada for the first time since 1880. Nobody knows what to make of that, but you can believe the farmers in the valley are freaked. So anyway, there I was, some kind of 10-year-old environmentalist, went on and studied ecology at Stanford. Like Ronnie said, started the Whole Earth Catalog in '68, was Mr. Natural for a while, wound up in a three-piece suit in Sacramento, California, working for Jerry Brown. And Californians have half the greenhouse gas emissions of any other state people per capita, just because of a few easy regulations that were slipped in and turned out to have no economic effect. That was nice to see. As mentioned, there wound up being a whole book saying the Whole Earth Catalog had some environmental impact. And the book that tonight's talk is pretty much in reference to, and I see it's out in the lobby. The news items are cities are green, nuclear is green, genetic engineering is green, and thanks to the intractability of climate problems, geoengineering may well be necessary. These are heresies in the environmental community, and I'm having the great fun of being a heretic. Tonight I'll bear down somewhat on genetic engineering being green. First I want to frame, this is going to be mostly framing tonight, but out of framing, sometimes you get a different perspective on stuff. There are people in this audience who know so much more about green ag biotech than I do that I am not going to try to impinge on their expertise, but I'll talk a little bit about what else is going on in the world. The main event is that 5 out of 6 people in the world are in the developing world, in the global south. And what's interesting about that is that developing isn't a euphemism anymore. It's an actual event. And the developed countries and the developing countries will be relatively indistinguishable, I think, by mid-century. That's one of the reasons that everybody's urban. The urbanization is this huge event going on. It's the biggest migration in history. And you've now got millions of people moving to the city every year. They've been doing it for decades, and the demographic expectation is they're going to keep on doing it for decades. I see that as a fantastically environmentally good event because, among other things, people are leaving the countryside, especially in the developing world, where they've been caught in the poverty trap of subsistence agriculture on crappy land, raising generally inefficient crops, and burning everything that was wood for firewood and killing everything that was wild for bushmeat. And it wasn't good for the people, it wasn't good for the landscape, it wasn't good for anything. And that's why they were so eager to leave and move to town as soon as there was an opportunity to do that. And of course, the town they moved to is not downtown Shanghai, it's these squatter cities all over the world, like this is Kibera outside of Nairobi in Kenya, and 1 million people live there. 1 billion people live in these places all over the world. And they are getting out of poverty just as fast as they can. The United Nations and others have realized that slums are not the problem, slums are the solution. And people are going to these places, getting the informal economy going, by the way, providing markets for cash crops back in the villages that they left. And so agriculture is going economic in the developing world, in large part because of this movement to the slums. In the slums, things are pretty interesting. People are living this intense urban life, connects with national, in this case, railway. The amount of resourcefulness and ingenuity and just sheer gumption in the slums is pretty remarkable. Every now and then I hear people feeling that these people use less energy in the world and they should really stay just as poor as they can, because that's how we'll be able to stay ahead of greenhouse gases. Well, no way. These folks are not stepping aside for anything except very temporarily. They are getting out of poverty. They're getting into increasing prosperity. They are going to be using more energy. They're going to be using more food, better food, more protein. These two events, demographic events, moving to the cities and moving up in the world, is the main thing going on. And it means that for the next 30 years at least, you've got a kind of a weirdly bipolar world in a different way, where the global south is old and getting older in old cities that aren't changing much, and the global south is young and staying young for a while in these vast new cities that are growing 3 times faster than they ever did in Europe and 9 times bigger. It's another new kind of city. It's a new kind of agricultural market. And here in the global north, we look increasingly like this, whereas in the rest of the world, they look increasingly like it's their world. So where do you think the action's going to be for the next 30, 50 years? It's in these places. Now, where do GMOs figure into that? I'm going to show you a few of the slides I usually show to environmentalist audiences to remind them how strange we've become on the subject of GMOs. I think environmentalists and anti-GMO people who are not environmentalists are basically superstitious, anti-science, and, by the way, very harmful in treating GMOs as some kind of damned apocalypse. Because look who's using GMOs. This one I love quoting. The Amish, the most technology suspicious group in America, love BT corn. Because it's better corn. They're right. And they're sharp farmers. They know what they're doing. South Africans love the white maize. And it's engineered, and they're just fine with it. Been for a long time. A book I recommend to people who are not familiar with the whole GMO world is Nina Fedorov's Mendel in the Kitchen. It's a good survey of all that's going on there and puts many fears at rest where they belong. A fun book for my organic farmer friends is co-authored by man and wife, Raul Adamczak and Pamela Ronald. Raul teaches organic farming at UC Davis. Pam is a now world-class geneticist who has developed the submersible rice that can hold its breath underwater for 2 weeks. It's now on release in Bangladesh, and 1/3 of the rice crop every year typically in Bangladesh is lost to floods. With this improved variety, they're getting ahead of that. And then I think the overall goal, I think, is best expressed in a book by Sir Gordon Conway, The Doubly Green Revolution. This guy is a veteran. He was there for the original Green Revolution. He's one of the inventors of integrated pest management. He's in London, and he knows his stuff. I point out to my environmentalist friends that if they thought they were going to stop GMOs, they're failing in a big way. It is expanding. In many ways, it's the most successful agricultural innovation in history. It's taking off because growers want it. And increasingly, I think it will take off because consumers want it, and I'll get to that. I remind environmentalists who don't like GMOs that rice feeds half of the world, and but unfortunately it doesn't have the precursors of vitamin A, and so the golden rice, genetically engineered golden rice, that is going to save eyesight and in many cases the lives of millions of kids, was blocked by environmentalists who thought there was something spooky and wrong about it. Blocked for 10 years. It's only now going into release, I think, in the Philippines, and it could have been out there all this time. Similarly, in Africa, Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth International, both based in Europe and Amsterdam, have done what they could to frighten African nations away from using GMOs, and there's a very good book about that by Robert Paulberg called Starve for Science. I'll have a book list at the end of this. I know you're in the dark, don't worry about the notes on that. Greenpeace Australia brought shame upon itself and the entire environmental movement, I think, in last July, when they snuck into the Canberra biological laboratories and took a weed whacker wearing a ridiculous hazmat suit with the Greenpeace label on it, and undid a bunch of research that was going on. I think every time environmentalists attack research, they are committing a profound crime. With the research, you find out if something is safe or not. To prevent the research means that you stay in fear, and it makes one wonder if that's what they want. I was happy to see the response, for example, by the editor of Cosmos, which is the lead science magazine in Australia. He said that now Greenpeace is a sad, dogmatic, reactionary phalanx of anti-science zealots. Meanwhile, what is the moral, ethical approach to take on this? It's been looked at twice by the Newfield Council on Bioethics in England, and they have said emphatically that there's moral imperative for making GM crops readily and economically available to people in developing countries who want them. This is against European doctrine, but it's the right thing to do. I think we're going to be in the process of increasingly discovering how different tropical agriculture is from temperate agriculture, where most of the ag science has gone ahead in the last 150 years, and mostly goes ahead here in Nebraska. But I predict that because of these differences, such as the situation that they don't have a winter like you have to kill the pests are perpetual, that they're often comfortable using multiple crops in the same area in polyculture, and that the crops that they have, the cassavas and the sorghums and bananas and whatnot, are not particularly highly, I can't say evolved, highly bred, and there's lots of room for improvement. It's really hard to make corn better, it's really hard to make wheat better, but it's really easy to make, well, not easy, but there's a lot of room to make cassava better. And by the way, it's where most of the world's people increasingly are, and they are the markets that are most rapidly moving. So what I suspect will occur over the next decade or so is that the leading edge of ag biotech will be increasingly showing up not here in the States, not in Europe, but in China, India, Philippines, Indonesia, Africa, Latin America, developing world. And after years of them stealing our ideas, we may come a time when we've got to steal theirs. I think the thing which will change the story for consumers in this country is, because bear in mind the GM foods so far are basically good for growers, but don't do anything special for consumers, except maybe keep the price down a bit. But as soon as these things like the Bio Cassava Plus, the improved sorghum, the improved bananas for Africa, head into release, and this is going to be one of those deals like when you travel in Africa, you can get a better cell signal than anywhere here. It may well be that people will find that they're getting more nutritious foods in Africa pretty soon than they can get here. And the things I marked in red here are some of the beginnings of the so-called functional foods that have, in a sense, either nutritional or medical attractions to them. And I think Americans will do anything to take something as medicine. As near as I can tell, health food stores live wholly on the idea that what is available there is medicine. Well, pretty good. If you can put out a modified and engineered carrot that has all the calcium you need, and if you're averse to foods that are like milk and cheese and butter, you get all the calcium, you don't get osteoporosis. That's nice. There's people allergic to peanuts. Well, the University of Georgia has a peanut that's engineered so you're not allergic to it. And on down the line. I think these things will, this is what I tease my organic farmer friends with, because they say they're never going to allow any engineered crops to be grown organically and certified as organic. I say, fine. Do you want to be left behind as basically a nostalgia crop where people pay extra for food that's not as healthy as what they can get from other growers? If there really is a pig with omega-3 fatty acids in it coming along, that will be very interesting. You're urging people to eat more bacon. This is good for you. And the soybean, as you know, is already underway with omega-3 fatty acids. Not, as I gather, to be eaten directly, though I don't know why not. But I think it's great. Again, environmentally, it means you're killing fewer fish in order to get the omega-3 fatty acids in people, because it is good for your brain, good for your heart, and good for the people who sell it. If you can get it from crops where soybeans grow, that beats getting the fish out of the ocean. I wish this were a comprehensive list. One of the things that I bang on environmentalists about is, look, Biotech, Monsanto and Syngenta and BASF and DuPont, all these guys weren't even trying to do green stuff. They were just trying to provide more attractive stuff for their customers, for the growers. But by the way, BT corn, BT cotton, and the rest use a hell of a lot less pesticide. And I can tell you as an ecologist, the gnarliest thing that comes out of agriculture in terms of stuff coming out is pesticides. It's bad for people working on the farms, it's bad for all the creatures, and the less of it, the better. If you can stick it in the genes, stick it in the fabric of the plant, that's great. Likewise, with soybeans, herbicide-tolerant soybeans, that means you don't have to plow them. That's better for the soil. It's certainly better for the grower, because that's a whole lot of expense, plowing and so on, you don't have to do, which, by the way, saves a lot of energy, which, by the way, torn up soil is what sends up fumes of greenhouse gases that, if the ground stays intact, don't go up. I mentioned the flood-tolerant rice that Pam Ronald developed, and presumably as climate becomes increasingly an issue, we'll see more things that are drought-tolerant, salt-tolerant. We'd like to see things that are way more efficient in the way they use fertilizer, so less fertilizer can be used. Great, that saves money. Hopefully keeps the fertilizer from going down the river and killing off parts of the ocean. We want to see more carbon fixing. We want to see things that can be attuned to local climate, local weather situations, local other plants, and so on. I think all of that's coming. I'd love to see a list like that developed. Now here's a surprise. Just this fall, the very first green organization that said GMOs might be okay is the best one you could hope for. The Nature Conservancy is the largest environmental organization in the world, the most scientifically driven, and the most trusted. And so for Peter Kariva here, their chief scientist, to come out and say, you know, there's a lot that's green about GMOs, that starts to be a shifting. And go ahead and quote him, go ahead and look this up online, and make people that you know are uncomfortable about GMOs a little less comfortable, a little more comfortable actually. I'm probably a tree hugger. I grew up in the summers in Michigan, which has almost no more white pines because my ancestors cut them all down. They clear-cut the entire state. And that's always been kind of an unforgivable crime in my family. So a couple of years ago, my wife and I went to Tasmania specifically to see these trees The tallest hardwoods in the world, Eucalyptus regnans, 300 feet high. Some of them are protected in Tasmania and southern Australia, but quite a lot of them are turned to cardboard. They cut them down not for timber, it's eucalyptus. They just chip them up for cardboard and probably ship it off to us. I think that is nuts. You know, there's lots of things you can get cardboard from. You can probably grow it in a vat pretty soon. To cut down these absolutely magnificent trees, who, by the way, earned their goddamn 300 feet. It just seems nuts to me. So, you start looking, and I realized, a little research, that plantations are a tremendously efficient way to grow wood fiber, and like 5 times better. And David Victor and Jesse Ossibel said that basically, instead of logging half the world's forests, we could leave 90% of them alone to grow, to be fabulous to visit, to be fixing lots of carbon, and meanwhile, you're getting much better, straighter, all the rest of the things that you want from this plantation wood. I think it's great. Now, the Forest Stewardship Council, I think, is a wonderful accreditation entity. They basically let you know how green the lumber is when you go to buy it. But they have a limitation, which is that they don't, while they do cover plantation forests and plantation wood, which is good, they so far refuse to do engineered trees. So I would like to see them do an offshoot of the Franken Forest Stewardship Council that just goes ahead and says how green the engineered trees are. There's a lot of BT poplars in China, for example. You know, is that working out well or not? These guys could help sort that out. Alien invasive species are turning out less problematic than people thought. Here's an array of them. But the ones that are really nasty, like those red ants, the cane toad on the bottom, the lamprey eel, the ones that are really awful, you would like to be able to take out with an extremely targeted biotic control. And that probably, there's what, 250 biotic control organisms that have been accredited and used in the world now. They're almost all of them tiny little bugs. You don't use cane toads to get rid of cane flies anymore. You use the smallest thing you can because it can be the most accurately targeted to the target species. I presume that we'll be able to target these kinds of creatures, including the cane toad. There's in fact a ranavirus, a toad virus being developed in Australia, where they're going to try to undo this former biotic control mistake with simply a more astute biotic control. I think that's a good use of biotech, yet to be developed. 40% of ice-free land is got agriculture going on in it, most of it grazing. And so the rainforest in the Amazon, for example, mostly is giving way to people putting in one form or another of ranching. So while I normally don't have a lot of use for PETA, what do they call themselves, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, I love that they just said, hey, anybody can come up with some vat-grown meat that really replaces that whole apparatus of land use and suffering animals and every other damn thing, and can provide Stewart Brand a ribeye as good as I had lamb chops tonight, as good as the lamb chops I had tonight at the US Bank. I'm there. And I think this, whether or not this particular offer gets met, growing meat on trees just sounds swell to me, or in vats. Now, it is about to be the case that recombinant DNA, the things that we've been doing with genetically engineering food crops for the last 20 years, is being superseded by a whole new set of technologies referred to generally as synthetic biology. And these are the so-called Carlson curves. Rob Carlson in Seattle keeps track of the rate of biotechnology And Moore's law has been surpassed by just by sequencers and readers, code readers, but it is now being more than surpassed by things that are going into synthetic biology. The rate of improvement is such that my wife, who's in this business, oh, by the way, this is Rob Carlson's book, Biology is Technology. It's a nice survey. It's not the most exciting book in the world in terms of how it's written, but the content is fabulous. Anyway, I mentioned my wife, who has run a company called DNA Direct for a number of years, was at the big gathering of investors in biotech in San Francisco, the JP Morgan meeting last week, and came back burbling saying, oh, by the way, there is now a desktop genomic sequencer from Life Technologies, from Ion Torrent, has been working on it hard over for 2 years. They've moved from optical reading of genes back to chemical reading of genes, and as a result, they can now do in 2 hours a full diagnostic read-up on genes. So for example, if you're on the table with a tumor, cancer that's being taken out, while you're on the table, they can check the exact genetic nature of that tumor and see what the state of your body is in relation to it, and then have a very targeted treatment for you by the time you're in the recovery room. They expect that by the fall, in 2 hours, with this $150,000 machine, they can do the whole damn genome. What that means is this sequence of events is, you can expect later in this decade, probably much later in the decade, but still this decade, a handheld sequencer for $200 that'll do genomes. And that's just reading the code. Writing the code is going to be moving along too. Drew Indy at Stanford is out there enthusing children and becoming biotech engineers, not as something they might imagine they'll be doing sometime in the future, but something they can do now at home. And they are developing into these people, the iGEM teams. There's the Jamboree they have every year, what was it, 2,000 undergraduates, 160 teams from 30 countries. This is a global technology now. And what these people are doing is basically creating organisms, mostly E. coli, that can do amazing things. And then they race them. And the winners of these teams have fabulous things. Creatures, some of them are frivolous. They'll have a bunch of microbes that'll line up and do the wave. But also microbes that can sense pollution in fresh water, find it, and defeat it. Microbes that can improve soil. The second prize winners this year was the group from Imperial College. Remember, these are all undergraduates. These are summer projects. So the problem the Imperial College group from London took on was, in many parts of the world, plants can't fasten ground fast enough to keep it from blowing away. So they were looking for a way to make the root systems grow faster. And by the way, that also fixes a lot of carbon right where you like it, which is out of the air and down in the soil. And so without my notes, I can't explicate this as well as they did. But what it says here is the first module is engineering bacteria to move toward the roots where they can be taken up by the plant. The bacteria in this case are E. coli that they've engineered. Then there's Auxin Express, where the engineered bacteria get into the root. They produce the indole-3 acetic acid, which is a plant growth hormone, and makes the roots grow fast and strong. And just to be sure that nobody was worried about anything, they talked to Greenpeace, they talked to everybody. They developed a swell little, what they call gene guard, a safety mechanism to prevent the transfer of plasmid DNA from the engineered bacteria to wild bacteria. Basically, they included a toxin in there, and an antitoxin, and if the active gene gets out and the antitoxin isn't there, it immediately dies. Pretty clever for a summer project for undergraduates. Nature magazine had this description of how you can have a complete do-it-yourself biotech laboratory now in the garage for not much. In fact, Rob Carlson took a picture of one in Silicon Valley. That's sure enough a garage. And the expectation is that soon enough, this kind of equipment is coming to the garden shed. Now, what does that signify? Well, the days of adult behavior are gone. This is what young people now want to get excited and make things. And so you've seen these things called maker fairs. They've been growing apace, 8 of them last year, more of them the coming year. There's a magazine called Make that is enabling basically teenagers to make anything. Their approach to technology is we just want to rip the back off it and get our hands in where we're not supposed to touch. And you get interesting things.
The Sashimi Tabernacle Choir.
I see a little silhouette of a man. Scaramouche, will you do the fandango? Thunderbolt and lightning, very, very frightening.
Yeah. And then you can get a 3D printer for $48,000.
What if there was a machine that could make anything you could think of right on your desk?
A MakerBot is this magical device that turns ideas into objects.
A thin line of heated plastic is forced through a narrow tube that shapes it into whatever you want. More layers of plastic are added until the object is finished. Objects run from the practical, like interlocking gears or a working whistle.
So there's a guy in Ireland, Cathal Garvey, 26 years old, geneticist, who took that MakerBot and made a very cheap little centrifuge. Just collect it to a Dremel, make the Dremel fuge, and where it normally would cost for your garage biotech lab $500 for a decent centrifuge, this thing is the cost of a Dremel, and somebody's MakerBot making you this cool thing, which the plans are totally online, of course. It's getting weird out there. Meanwhile, and this I picked up today, it just was in the New York Times today, in the Science Times, also it mentioned that GenSpace in Brooklyn is one of the many DIY do-it-yourself bio labs that are basically open to people to just come in and start doing biotech. There's one in Boston, there's this one in Brooklyn, they're developing everywhere in the world. Get excited and make things. Okay, that's the approach that everybody is taking. You just grab the stuff, you hook it up to your iPhone, you drive it with your iPhone into some new set of capabilities, show it off on YouTube, everybody else gets it, then they imitate it and surpass it, and this stuff is moving very, very quickly. Amateur biotech is going to be a very interesting sequence of events. And the sign for me of that is when you take a look at a catalog like the Baker Creek Heirloom seed catalog, which is totally anti-GMO, and look at the stuff that they relish making and getting, and you realize that if the people who hate GMOs get this weird with their vegetables, imagine how interesting it's going to get when the people who love GMOs start screwing around with their vegetables. Produce hasn't been a big GMO event yet, but I think it is going to be, and if the pros don't do it, the amateurs will. Sandio from Japan already has a blue rose. You can forget all the poetry about how impossible a blue rose is. All the people that beat their brains out trying to make a blue rose for generations, it now exists. It's been engineered, like they got a little bit of pansy in there, and it just got okay by the United States government. This will not harm anybody. One that interests me a lot is the American chestnut basically went functionally extinct. It used to cover the entire East Coast deciduous forest and was maybe one of the most loved trees in North America, along with white pine. A lot of people made their living off it. Their pigs fed off it. It was, a fundamental mass tree, and unlike a lot of the other trees like oaks where you can't really eat the acorn, you can really eat the chestnut. Well, they all died because of an alien fungus. They keep trying to come back, but they keep failing. And there's been two courses moving forward then. One extremely exhaustive of backcrossing, and they've now got some with the Chinese chestnut. They've got some that are 15/16 American chestnut now that they're starting to try to reintroduce. But at the same time, recently changed their mind about, well, this is what a proper chestnut looks like. They're big guys. We want them back. And at State University of New York, a team there took the shortcut. They engineered a version of the American chestnut that they're pretty sure is not going to be susceptible to the fungus. It's a more American chestnut than the one that the back crossers came up with, and they're basically racing them now. And we'll see who prevails on that. My money would be on the engineered chestnut. Something I'm about to start work on, am starting work on actually with my wife, is the most heartbreaking extinction in American history was the passenger pigeon. The last pigeon died in 1914, named Martha. And there had been, it was the most abundant bird in America, maybe in the world. There was, they think, 5.5 billion passenger pigeons. They were hunted to extinction, and it was horrifying. It was how America learned about extinction, maybe because we saw that the passenger pigeon could go extinct. The last 250 or so American bison, the buffalo, were saved and bred back into now a pretty large population. That did not happen with the pigeon. But there's 2,000 dead specimens, stuffed specimens and so on, of passenger pigeons. Here's the head of one. And it looks like the engineering capabilities are now at hand from people like George Church at Harvard and Beth Shapiro at Penn State to basically line up the full reading of the genome of the passenger pigeon, which Beth has done, a full reading of a close pigeon like the band-tailed pigeon, note the differences, and then gene by gene and trait by trait make the living pigeon be the extinct pigeon. And it's basically a kind of a precision hybridizing where one of the participants is not actually alive. But I think we can do it. We're moving ahead on it. And my hope is that will change a lot of the flavor of how people feel about how green biotechnology can be. There's also work on moving ahead on the woolly mammoth, which would be an amazing thing to have back in the world, but in fact it would be ecologically and climatically profound because what is now frozen tundra that is turning into greenhouse gases used to be grasslands that were maintained by this grazing mammoth. And there's a mad Russian named Sergei Simov doing what he calls Pleistocene Park, where he's bringing the megafauna back to northern Siberia, wants to have the mammoth there as soon as we have one for him. And he's already getting results that those animals treading around on the permafrost and eating it in a normal way turn it back into grasslands. And that will be climatic good news. So bring back the passenger pigeon, Ectopistes migratorius. Change of subject. I was asked to say something about climate. This is a real good year to talk about the main thing that happens with global warming, which is drought. Texas this year is, you may know that they're moving their cows north. It's just not tolerable anymore for them there. The guy up on the right here, that's his corn crop last July. The map on the left is the current state this January of drought in Texas. Whether this drought in Texas is full-on global warming, you can never say until there's 10 years of it or anything like it. You can't say that the flooding in Nebraska this year was necessarily climate, or that the snow 3 winters ago was necessarily climate. Until you've got patterns that are at least 10 years long, it's still not climate. Steve Schneider used to tell me it's just weather. Well, it's not signal yet, it's noise. But the things are stacking up that we haven't seen the dry Sierra Nevada in January since 1880 suggests something funny is going on. And I think people are getting a sense that the extreme events, there's more of them. The 100-year storms are not happening every 100 years anymore. So something's going on. So if climate change is in fact not coming, but already here, and I can tell you that every field biologist I know on continents or on oceans are finding severe changes going on with the biota that they're studying. The animals and the plants are moving uphill, they're moving north, they're moving away from the heat and the dry toward what's left of the cold and the wet. So something's going on that is at scale that those creatures recognize and are responding to. Now the hypothesis is that if we continue as we've been going, this is the business as usual scenario, there's reasons to believe that the whole thing might stabilize 5 degrees Celsius warmer. It doesn't sound so bad. It happened 55 million years ago, also because of an overdose of CO2 and methane. And at that point, who was running the climate was not so much the oceans as the continents, but it was not a world we would want to live in because it probably, I mean, the rainforests are gone, turned to scrub and desert. There might be carrying capacity for, instead of 7 billion people or 9 billion people, 1.5, 2 billion people. That's, you know, what happened to the 5 billion people who don't make it. That's warfare, or a form of civilization we would probably really not want to have, or no civilization at all. So the effort is terraforming, climate engineering. We've screwed around with the climate, we've done it badly, we've got to unscrew the screwing around and keep things back on this nice, relatively stable domain that we've had for the last 10,000 years, which is, not surprisingly, the time at which civilization actually arose. So civilization has trouble taking this seriously because we've never experienced it before as a civilization. This thing that we're facing is not only made by us, it's new to us. A book I recommend to you on this is 6 Degrees by Mark Linus, a British writer and a friend. One of the reasons there's so much debate about climate within the climate professionals is it is the gnarliest system, large, gnarly, very hard to model, though the models are getting better practically every week now. But there are a lot of instabilities and potential tipping points and scary things that might occur or might not occur, or that already have occurred, that we're still figuring out what that was actually made of. And so that's what the arguments are about, and those are good arguments to have. So a point I want to make is that in the arguments about climate, one argument is the right thing. This is emerging science. But there's some arguers worth paying more attention to than others. Ones that are agenda-driven, like some of my fellow environmentalists, as soon as you hear them saying there's something evil about humanity and this is retribution, you can stop listening to whatever they have to say about climate because they're going to say it about something else if it wasn't climate. They are calamitists. On the other hand, if somebody is saying, well, you know, climate is just a liberal conspiracy to get world government, I'm sorry, that's a political analysis of a non-political scientific situation. And for whatever it's worth, everybody I know that's worried about climate, none of them have in mind world government. But you can sort of understand the logic. We realize it is an actual global scale problem. It will take a global scale solution. But that doesn't necessarily imply, I hope it doesn't, imply anything like world government. It might imply world governance of the kind that we are hopefully getting better at in terms of finance and so on. The people I think worth paying attention to closely are what I call the warners and the skeptics, people who are evidence-driven, which means that their views change as the evidence changes. And so the climatological models said that the Arctic ice was going to melt at a certain rate, and X% of it was going to be gone by 2050. And suddenly X% of it was gone in the summer of 2007. And a whole lot of people went, whoa, back to the drawing board. And they changed what was on the drawing board. They changed the models. They incorporated that data into their understanding of what was going on. And the skeptics are continuing to raise questions about Well, why do none of the models take clouds seriously? Well, the reason they don't yet is because we're still figuring out how clouds work with climate change. Low clouds seems to reflect sunlight off the planet. Good, raises the albedo. But high clouds trap the sunlight, not the sunlight, the radiated heat coming back up off the Earth and trapping it and acting like a greenhouse gas. So figuring out how clouds are affected by warming has a lot to do with whether they're high altitude or low altitude. That's still being sorted out. There's missing carbon disappearing into the continents. We're not sure where or how or why. There's disappearing heat going into the oceans that is keeping things less radical for us than you would expect. The oceans are swelling up with exactly the heat we're expecting from the sun that is being trapped, but it's not changing surface temperatures. What's the mechanism of doing that? Some kind of downwellings? Nobody knows. So those debates are going on every year because so many people are working on it. The data is getting better and the models are getting better. And the trend of evidence has been to make for more warners and fewer skeptics, and both of them to be more alarmed than they were. If that trend keeps up, then everybody will be warners. I'm in the warner category. I'm over on the IE side. I think things are dire. I think we have a climate problem of century scale, something that civilization has never dealt with before and is threatened by. And the idea that civilization is facing an existential issue we haven't really had since the Cold War, the potential of a nuclear exchange. This is actually worse and much harder to deal with. And everybody's involved because we are the makers of the problem. It's pretty interesting. This is going to be an amazing century. Everybody's involved. Well, one reading of the farming footprint is the largest source, man-made source of greenhouse gases. You got it coming from the energy that's used. You got it coming from the loss of forests as you expand the fields, the nature of plowing, and all the rest of it. This could be taken as a guide to how to green up agriculture. So you go down from 49 gigatons of carbon dioxide a year. Another book by Mark Linus I'll recommend, and I think I'll close with this because it gets to the scale that I think we're talking about. There's a wonderful article in Nature magazine a couple of years ago on planetary boundaries. And it was basically saying there's 9 things that humans are now impacting the planet at planetary scale. And number 2, climate change we know about, and the ideal would be to keep the carbon dioxide at 350 parts per million. It's already at 391, I think, and headed up. Biodiversity loss, there's number 4, nitrogen cycle, which you guys have, I think, a hand in. And in fact, when you look at this whole list, agriculture has things to offer each one of these. Certainly water use. Land use change is a big event. Talking about 15% of the globe being cropland. Cropland is even tougher on natural systems than grazing land. Anything that can concentrate that is an improvement. The scale of what we're doing has been described as the Anthropocene, that we are finished 10,000 years of a geological era called the Holocene, and we are now in a geological era that's human-dominated called the Anthropocene. This is increasingly agreed to by the various scientists who have looked at it because they see the evidence of human behavior everywhere. There's not just no pristine wilderness anywhere in the sense of you can't see the impacts of human activity, but we have set in motion planetary scale dynamics, some of which are just fine. I hasten to point out that we were supposed to have had an ice age by now, and it looks like agriculture prevented that. Thank you very much. One schedule says 1,500 years ago was about the time for the next, we were in interglacial, right? We said we should be having the glaciers back. Were they here last time? Did the glaciers come to Nebraska? They did. Well, thank you for keeping them back. And they will probably never come again as long as humans are doing the kind of stuff humans are doing. It's so delicate a matter that just the amount of greenhouse gases and other things that we're doing have changed the whole glacial, interglacial set of behaviors. That's the Anthropocene. But there's a problem with that, in that since we were terraforming Earth, never mind terraforming Mars, we are now making Earth less Earth-like. And we need to go back to making Earth more Earth-like. There's damage to undo. And I think that's the actual program for this century, is to restore the climate, restore the natural systems, restore the Earth, restore our life with the Earth, and it is going to be an amazingly interesting century. Thank you. Here comes the question pointer. We need lights back up.
If we could get the lights back up. Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Brand. As we fully expected, he's given us a lot to think about in his comments tonight, and I'm sure that there are a number of questions in the audience. We have some time reserved for that, and have mics. Lisa's down on the floor here, and I think Mary Garbitz is up in the balcony with mics. So if you have a question, if you'd pop your hand up and let one of those ladies get the microphone to you. We do need you to speak into the mic for the streamed audience so that it'll get recorded and people will be able to hear you on the streaming. And you might just identify yourself for our speaker so he'd know who's asking him a question. Mike?
Well, Mr. Brand, very, very interesting discussion. I'm truly impressed. I find that I've never heard anyone quite with the mixture that you've had in terms of busting myths on both sides of the aisle, and truly came with something that's fact-filled, thought-provoking, and really gives us a lot to chew on. It's interesting to look, and I totally agree with some of your comments with regard to people either get on the political side of it or they get on some other agenda side. And it's interesting to recognize that and realize that we need to now look at facts and science and figure out how we move forward. When you look at greenhouse gases, and particularly most of us here in agriculture, recognize there's tremendous progress that's been made, primarily with the use of genetic engineering to reduce tillage, reduce the amount of pesticides, increase the number of bushels per drop of water, and so on. And you mentioned that agriculture has the biggest footprint. When we look at, from an industrial standpoint, China and some of the things that are going on there, are we making as much progress there, and how do you see us moving forward in terms of trying to feed the world and do that with the best agriculture we can come up with and still achieve the challenge of controlling and helping to control greenhouse gases? How do you see that moving forward?
I think it's going to be bottom up and top down. In a sense, biotech, agricultural biotech has been kind of top down for a while, coming out of the universities, coming out of large corporations. The small companies got, basically shot down by the regulatory environment. It was just too hard for them. They couldn't wait through the delays of going through 3 branches of the government to get an okay and so on. So as we're seeing with nuclear energy, which I also support, it's moving more quickly in the developing world in some respects. And I think we'll gain pace, and countries in the developing world, thanks to everything from cell phones to international meetings, pay a lot of attention to each other. Cities pay a lot of attention to each other. And so best practices can promulgate very quickly. I think we're used to agricultural people being pretty conservative and not change so fast, but I think that's changing. And we've seen it everywhere. I mean, when glyphosate went out of patent and got cheap, suddenly everybody was using glyphosate. Likewise, when BT cotton in India got stolen from the Monsanto, Mako test fields, suddenly there are dozens of hybrid local landrace caterpillar-proof /BT forms of cotton all over India. It's kind of like the music business. I have a feeling that there's a grassroots, quasi-illegal proliferation that is coming. And it's part of what I was kind of pointing out, that the amateur capabilities of doing biotech, both reading and writing genetic code, is coming so quickly. And it's going to be probably so hated by some corporations and some companies, some countries, that you'll have some of the kind of standoff we had with people stealing music until Steve Jobs figured out a way to monetize it just enough and make it more convenient for everybody. Stuff like that's going to be going on, I think, over the next couple of decades with biotech, because it's moving so fast and getting so much into the amateur domain. And food is of the essence. And you may have noticed that cooks are getting weirder. Well, if cooks are that rewarded for getting weird, you know that the growers, probably the farmers markets, are going to get rewarded for getting weird. And so it's going to be wild and woolly out there. And I think if I were in biotech now, I'd be tempted to see what's going on sort of the underground, outlaw, do-it-yourself bio, iGym. Maybe University of Nebraska should have an iGym team. Minnesota does. And just get out there where it's getting weird and get weird with it.
I think that was a challenge, Dean Waller.
I'd like to follow up on that, if I might. Back here. Thank you. I'll stand up so you can see. If I'm hearing correctly, then issues that have been raised about GMOs, for example, the somewhat monopolistic practices of Monsanto with Roundup Ready and the way that's had repercussions for certain farmers and other corporate entities and created problems. If I'm hearing you right, then you would rest the case on the dispersed kind of innovation at a grassroots level as the counter leverage from that. Without being alarmist, does that raise questions about the potential risks if we think about that distributed backyard GMO genetic modification, in that best practices may help us understand how to do the process, but won't necessarily transfer to all the individuals in terms of safeguards or the necessary constraints that operate, say, around university laboratories and stuff? So how do we deal with that risk factor of GMOs if it's a distributed type of environment?
The question is risk with dispersed innovation. Dispersed innovation is a wonderful term. Good luck stopping it. But I think you can work with it. I hung out with the computer people all through the 70s and 80s, and in fact in 1983 co-organized the first Hackers Conference, which is now an annual event. And at the time, hackers were talking about white hat hackers and black hat hackers, white hat hackers basically being guys mostly who were teaching each other their skills, and black hat hackers basically criminals who were cracking into systems and either stealing or doing damage. Both those systems have grown up in a big way. Nobody's brought down the internet yet, though some have tried. The early days, I remember the FBI would come around without the faintest idea of what was going on. Some guy who had copied a game and maybe improved it. The FBI is all over him saying, "What are you doing and are you a threat to the United States?" And some kid, what? There's going to be some of that. But we've learned a lot from that one. And so I think the biotech hackers, so far, when you go to the IGM meetings, at Jamboree, and here's all these seething undergraduates racing their microbes against each other. And here's a guy coming around dressed kind of like them, only his badge says, forget his name, say it's Kilroy. Joe Kilroy, FBI, Office of Weapons of Mass Destruction. And he's walking around and introducing himself to people. Hi, great project you guys got. Listen, if you see anything weird, here's my card. Call me. The do-it-yourself bio guys, the iGym people, so far this is such a young, idealistic gang that they are talking way more serious responsibility stuff than anybody. They are providing their own norms of behavior and misbehavior. That's the way that norms actually arise in the world, is by people doing stuff and then figuring out what's going to be best for the thing that they all love going forward. So the thing that they see as the worst disaster would be somebody doing bioterrorism with one of these things, or somebody being really stupid and harmful with one of these things. Fortunately, it is really, really hard to make something really harmful, especially that is going to prosper in the wild. The wild is as many of you have found with crops, a dangerous place for anything that is the slightest bit different than what's already out there. So I think this is dispersed innovation will have problems. They won't be quite as great as people fear. There will be some surprises, but when cell phones first came along, there were people who said, oh no, this is going to increase the digital divide, it just makes the people who have this more than that. And it turned out exactly the opposite way. Cell phones were the most empowering thing in the century. This will not be quite like that. Genes are not bytes and bits. We don't communicate through genes, but everything else does. We're finally getting to a microbial level of understanding of how biology works. And when I studied ecology, it was a black box. What was going on in the soil, what was going on in the organisms, what was going on, all the stuff that we couldn't basically see. And now with shotgun sequencing of whole populations of biota, including in us, we're starting to get a sense of the dynamics of nature at its most comfortable realm. Most of life is microbial. The atmosphere is run by microbes in the ocean, not by us. Can we help them? What does help mean? That's part of what we're going to be figuring out in this century. So it's a dispersed set of life forms out there, and to have our technology disperse along with that range of living activity, I think is what's happening anyway, and not automatically a problem, but we should keep an eye on it.
Other questions? Mary, you have one up top.
I have just one comment, yeah. I have to make out, I do disagree on one point that in Africa, I did not get good cell phone reception. On my second point.
He said in Africa he didn't get good cell phone reception.
And specifically
Where were you?
Ethiopia, Rwanda, Tanzania.
Rwanda, well.
Kenya was okay, Nairobi.
Gorillas, what were you doing in Rwanda?
Coffee-related stuff with USAID.
Excellent.
And the spread program. But in any case, it's not so much technology and its advancement that I'm worried about, because I think that a lot of things are interesting, like bringing back the mammoth to, bring back the grasslands in Siberia. It seems to me a little, possibly unnecessary, because the next step might be dinosaurs. But besides that, my main issue is the Malthusian theory of, the more food that you produce, the more population will increase. And I know that Norman Borlaug in 1970 won a Nobel Peace Prize for his high-yielding wheat varieties, and he did save a lot of starving children in China, and I think it was an acute situation for technology that was available and should be used at that time. But to use that sort of technology, however we feel like using it, specifically for the sake of profit, let's say, retaining the rights to a seed and making that seed, having the inability to use it the next season. I think that there's some issues there that I'm really concerned about, not necessarily advancement of technology, but the use of it in our society and our world. So do you have any comments on the basic Malthusian idea, if you know what that is?
I think you just made a comment.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear all of that. It sounded, some of it was Malthusian in population, is that correct? Malthus was a weird duck. Dead right on some important stuff. I'm recommending books tonight. Another book I'll add right here is The Coming Population Collapse by Fred Pierce. In Europe, it's called People Quake. It's the best book on demographics I've seen, by far. Came out just a year and a half ago. Population inflected just about the time that my teacher Paul Ehrlich's book came out in 69, where it had been going up, and then it started to inflect, and it's been heading toward leveling off ever since. So, and there's more food all that time, thanks to you guys. So it turned out, in that sense, Malthus was wrong, that more food would not automatically lead to endlessly more people. And it got pretty cruel when the flat-out Malthusians. Malthus himself was not involved in letting the Irish die when the potato famine hit, but people he had persuaded to his way of thinking said, good riddance, they just breed anyway, and act exactly those terms in Britain. And it was cruel and counterproductive. As it turns out, when people get enough to eat, then they stop having extra babies as insurance. If they can get medical care for the kids, which they do when they move to town, they start having fewer kids. The main event of this urbanization is women who are having normally 6 children in the countryside instantly, as soon as they get to town, before they have any improvement in their personal welfare, but just in their prospects, they have fewer kids, down to 1 and 2. And then they get education for those kids. And they'll spend their last rupee to get education to the kids. So the strict Malthusian thing started to fall apart half a century ago and is pretty much completely gone by now. There is an underlying thing that can happen. I could well imagine a horrific climate scenario in which things get Malthusian again, at least in some areas. There's some people who are saying that it's like that in parts of Africa. Jared Diamond, his friend, thinks that that's part of what happened with overcrowded parts of Africa. But lots of Africa is not crowded at all. So I think that's all going to sort out too.
A lot of people are still starving in Africa, and it's not because there isn't enough food in the world, it's the distribution of that food. Not necessarily the technology for producing more higher yields.
They haven't got irrigation, they haven't got fertilizer. What was the country? Malawi said, here's fertilizer for everybody, and they went from not enough food for everybody to suddenly enough food. It was pretty easy.
And it's all the distribution.
It's not distribution. It's just
it's the governments that are in control that are making it more difficult for that type of technology and distribution of GMO or not. Doesn't matter in my opinion.
I agree.
Nature
GMO or not is not the main
nature
event.
is powerful enough to provide enough people if we do it properly.
I'd love to have cassava that doesn't have cyanide in it. And that doesn't succumb to the virus, and that you can store for more than 2.5 hours, and all the other things that BioCassava. Who's the BioCassava Plus guy? Is he here? There's one here in the university.
Ed Cahooney's not here, I didn't see.
Ed Cahooney, go to him about cassavas. What else?
One more question up in the balcony in the back. Mary?
I'd like to have you discuss a little bit more about water as being it's a resource in Nebraska. It's important to agriculture in the world. You mentioned about drought in Texas. Even what is Nebraska as a state? What do we need to be doing to prepare in the future, and what technology will do to help us to, save our water and the utilization of agriculture in that area in the world too, the effects of water. Just discuss that in more detail if you would, please.
I'm out of my depth in that one. One thing I think is coming probably sooner than many expect is more desalination. At least on the coast where you've got excesses of salt water. And I think probably more nuclear coming on, just because that's the cheapest, the easiest way to get massive amounts of clean energy, clean electricity, since those things typically are by the oceans anyway, as we noticed in Japan. It's a good place to do serious desalination, especially with the new hotter reactors, the integral fast reactors. So I would love it if Los Angeles stopped drawing down the Colorado, which is drying up anyway. And they're not going to draw down the Pacific Ocean anytime soon. So the coastal regions, which is where people to a large extent are moving anyway, and it's going to get weird there, is one of the things I learned from James Hansen's book, Storms of My Grandchildren, is once sea level starts moving, it doesn't stop. Once it goes up, you got to deal with that, and you think you've got it stabilized, and it won't stabilize. It'll start going down on you, and then you have to deal with that. The real estate people will go nuts. And it's this weird slow motion kind of horrific thing that'll go on. But in the course of all that, I don't think people are going to move away from the coast. They're just going to start living like I do on a boat, tugboat, and plugging into electricity that is coming from something small instead of something large. Small means like a small modular reactor instead of a huge solar farm 200 miles away or a huge wind farm 60 miles away. That's the kind of thing I see coming by mid-century, by which time we'll be seeing sea levels moving and things like desalination looking very plausible. So what I did is I moved from the question where you had a real question to an area where I know a little bit.
That's actually a great segue. As our last question, to announce that the next Heuermann Lecture, which will be February the 20th, here in this same location at 3:30 in the afternoon, will be delivered by Roberto Linton, who is coming to the university. Many of you will know February 1st to be the founding director of the Water for Food Institute here on campus. And his topic will be water, think globally, act locally. So we would encourage you to come listen to Roberto. It'd be a good chance for people to meet him early after his arrival. We're really looking forward to him being here, and it would tie to your question. In closing tonight, first of all, let's give Mr. Brand another round of applause for a great presentation. I mentioned earlier this was the fourth one of these Heuermann Lectures, but we just have received the medal that we have commissioned to commemorate the lectures and to give to our honored lecturers, and Mr. Brand's going to be the first recipient of that tonight. It's a beautiful medal that does depict the four areas of food, energy, natural resources that we will have on the screen for the next lecture for you to be able to see. And Mr. Brand, we're very pleased to be able to present you this in commemoration of the lecture. And I'll give Keith, you and Norma, you have one here for you to take home with you as well for the Heuermanns. So
thanks, guys.
Great commemorating kind of piece of work that our Ed Media people have done. Just like to thank, in closing, our Ed Media folks for great help in supporting the lectures, and again tonight, And to support the web streaming, Judy Nelson in our Ed Media group has been the coordinator for the lectures and has done a great job in organizing them, publicizing them, and making sure everything has come off well. Judy's somewhere probably in the back working. Please give Judy a round of applause for all the work that she's done. One thing, and I just was kind of surveying the audience as we were finishing up tonight, this has been a really diverse audience here tonight, and I'm really pleased to see that. We've had leaders from state government here, we've had leaders from the university administration here from more than one campus. We have a lot of people from the industry here tonight. The Ag Builders meeting is tomorrow, their annual meeting, and there are a lot of folks here from the Ag Builders group from across the state. It's great to see them, and a lot of our university faculty and staff. I would encourage those of you, particularly our university community, to encourage our students to participate in these lectures. I've seen quite a few students here tonight. It's great to see our students. I would like to see more students here at our lectures as we continue to build this series. Mark on your calendars in April. We will not have a lecture in March. We will have a lecture in April. We don't have the date set for that yet, but the topic and the speaker, I can tell you, will be Jay Kiesling, a professor at UC Berkeley, in the algal biofuels arena, second generation biofuels arena. Jay is a Nebraska native, grew up in Harvard, Nebraska, and is one of the international leaders in that arena of research. So we're really looking forward to Jay being here. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank Mr. Brand again, and have a good evening.